Well, right now we have decreasing gas demand in Europe, so this is particularly challenging for all European gas companies, and this is what they need to tackle. Unfortunately, we do expect European gas demand to increase very moderately over the next few years because the gas demand is faced with a perfect storm. On one side, there is of course the European crisis, which is driving very low energy demand and in particular relatively low power demand. And in the power sector in particular, you have not only the competition from increasing renewables, but also the competition from coal-fired plants because coal prices are much lower than gas prices, as well as relatively low CO2 prices. So it means that in the power sector in particular, gas-fired plants are no longer competitive with coal-fired plants, and it leads to closure of mothballing of gas-fired plants. But also there is an issue with demand destruction in the industrial sector, with gas demand in industrial sector decreasing as well. But there are also maybe potential to increase gas demand in other sectors which have been left untouched until now, like the transport sector, where there could be opportunities in shipping or also for LNG trucking. Well, when we talk about global gas prices or different prices, people tend to focus on three regions: the US, Europe, Asia. And when I talk about Asia, this is mostly Japan. Right now, there is a big discrepancy between all these prices. US gas prices are at about $4 per MMBTU, European gas prices between 10 and 12, and Japanese gas prices at $16 per MMBTU. However, we tend to forget about the rest of the world. Middle Eastern countries, African countries, Latin American countries, and Asian countries. And these countries also make a significant part of the global gas demand. In these countries, however, gas prices tend to be regulated. But more and more what we can see is that not only gas demand is going to increase very rapidly in these countries, but they will also need to import a lot of natural gas. And they will turn increasingly towards either oil indexation or gas-to-gas competition, because before the prices in these regions were regulated, sometimes below cost, which means subsidized. However, looking back again at this picture of US, Europe and Japan, can we see a global gas price convergence? Well, first of all, that will imply that US gas prices will increase. And here the picture is very complex because in each different sector there is a different alternative to natural gas. For industrials, for example, in particular for petrochemical or fertilizer industry, where the price of natural gas is very important, they need to look at the global market and see at what price their products are still competitive. In the power system, what is really important is coal, the competitiveness of gas versus coal. We have seen last year that when the gas prices are down to $2 per MMBTU, then coal is down as well, and the gas demand in the power sector increases very rapidly. However, this year gas prices have increased moderately, but still gas demand is down and coal demand is up in the power generation sector. In the transport sector, here this is the competitiveness of gas versus oil, and right now we have this big gap, which means that everybody is looking at gas in transport as a new demand potential. And on top of that, there is a potential for the US to export LNG. So here we need to look at the competitiveness of this US LNG in the different markets, in particular in Europe and Asia, which right now are the main LNG importers. And it's a matter of competitiveness of this US LNG versus other sources of gas. But it could mean that gas prices ultimately in the United States will increase progressively by 2020, by 2025, although nobody really knows by how much and by when, because the main question is on the supply side. Where is the tipping point in the US supply curve? Is it by 2020? Is it by 2025? I mean, do we have an infinite volumes of gas at $5 to $6 per MMBTU? Or suddenly are we going to see, well, I mean, upon a certain volume, we need to increase prices quite sharply in order to produce an additional BCM, maybe at $6, at $7 per MMBTU. And in that case, gas will no longer be competitive in many sectors, including for LNG exports. But there is right now a lot of focus on what is going on in Asia. In Europe, we have, one could say, successfully renegotiating our long-term contracts, and there is more and more spot pricing indexation. However, in Asia, there is no such spot price indexation. People right now are focusing on what they have, the long-term contracts, which are relatively inflexible, and on top of that, they are linked to oil prices, which makes them relatively expensive. So people have three options. Either they can decrease the slope of existing and future contracts, or they can move to Henry Hub-based contracts based on these new LNG exports coming from the United States, and also ask future LNG exporters to also base their LNG exports on Henry Hub prices. Or ultimately, they can also try to base their LNG export contracts on an Asian spot price, which doesn't exist for the moment, but there are potential in order to create an Asian trading hub, maybe in Singapore, and maybe looking a little bit further in the future in China, in Japan, or in Korea. Well, let me first start with the current situation. As you may know, in 2012 we had a decline in LNG trade, and it was not because we had lower LNG export capacity. On the contrary, we had increasing LNG export capacity, but there were many issues in LNG exporting countries, and these issues may continue in the future. I'm talking about instability and increasing domestic gas demand in Egypt, pipeline bombings in Yemen, declining output in Indonesia. So I mean, these kind of things can continue. However, when we are looking at the medium term, the next 5 years, there are two important things. First, there is a massive increase of LNG exports coming from Australia. This LNG is already contracted. This LNG will go to Asia. This LNG will be extremely expensive because it's based on oil indexation, and also because the people who are promoting all these new LNG projects, they are facing labor shortages, the appreciation of the Australian dollar, and therefore their projects are facing huge capital cost increases. But the other interesting aspect of the LNG market over the next few years is that North America, as you mentioned in your question, is going to become an LNG exporter. And in particular, this is US. Right now, there are already 4 projects which have been approved to export to non-FTA free trade agreement countries, and they represent about 60 BCM of LNG export capacity, which means that the US, if all these projects are moving forward, and until now only one is definitely moving forward and is under construction, the US will become the third largest LNG exporter by 2020, behind Australia, Qatar. What is particularly interesting with these new projects is that, according to the first project, Cheniere, with its Sabine Pass project, the price of natural gas is no longer linked to oil prices, but is linked to Henry Hub prices. So that means that gas can reach Europe at about $9 to $10 per MMBTU with current prices, and can reach also Asia at about $12 per MMBTU with current prices, which makes it relatively interesting and competitive against the current sources of natural gas in these regions. So this is the reason why everybody is so interested in these new LNG exports. So they have the potential maybe to decrease the prices, maybe by offering a new kind of indexation, maybe also by, well, saying to the existing suppliers to these countries in Europe and also in Asia that they should lower the slopes in the existing LNG export contracts in order to be competitive. However, one should not think that the US gas prices are going to stay forever at $3-4 per MMBTU, and here there is a potential issue if gas prices in the US are increasing. And also it's important to focus on the business model of these new LNG export projects, because you have one company which is serving as a facilitator between the upstream and the uptake of LNG. And if the gas prices are too high, then there is still the opportunity for the company which is taking the LNG, well, to say, well, this LNG is too expensive, so I'm not taking it. I'm still paying the price for the liquefaction, but the tolling agreement, but I'm not taking the LNG because it's take or pay. So there could be here an issue or potential for LNG export in the US kind of self-regulated. If the gas price is too high, then there is no LNG export, which is kind of interesting. So definitely we are seeing a change in global gas markets, which of course are particularly interesting for Europe, but it's very early to say in which direction this is going to go.